When a young woman married into wealth, she thought she'd finally found security. But 3 days after giving birth, her husband's family abandoned her, not knowing she was sitting on $1 billion inheritance. What happens next will shock you. This is her untold story. I was 23 years old, living in a tiny studio apartment that cost most of my paycheck. I was working 2 jobs back then, mornings at a cafe and evenings at a hospital as a cleaning staff. My life wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting, but I had something most broke people have: hope. I genuinely believed things would get better. I believed in fairy tales, even though my life looked nothing like one. My apartment had paper-thin walls. I could hear my neighbors arguing, their television playing through the night. I had one window that faced a brick building. The only luxury I allowed myself was a small plant on that windowsill. It was the only green thing in my gray life. I'd talk to it sometimes when I came home at midnight, too tired to even heat up food. I'd say things like, "Tomorrow will be better," or "Someone will love you someday." I wasn't just talking to the plant. Then he walked into the cafe where I worked. I'll never forget that moment. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was wiping down the espresso machine. I didn't even look up at first. I was trained not to. Customers blur together when you work retail. They're just orders and payment methods. But something made me glance up that day. Maybe it was his cologne. Expensive, clean, nothing like the cheap deodorant smells I was used to. Or maybe it was just fate doing its thing. He was standing at the counter in a tailored suit and he was looking at me. Actually looking at me. Not through me like most people do to service workers. He had this confident smile, like he knew something I didn't. His eyes were kind, though. I remember thinking that. He ordered a simple black coffee, and when he paid, his hand brushed mine. I felt it. That spark everyone talks about in movies. I thought I was too tired from work to feel anything, but I felt that. He came back the next day. And the day after that. By the end of the week, he asked for my number. By the end of the month, we were dating. And I was falling fast, like someone jumping off a cliff and hoping there's water below. His name was solid. He was a businessman, he said. He never explained exactly what kind of business, and I never asked. I was too busy being amazed that someone like him wanted to be around someone like me. He took me to restaurants where you couldn't order water without it being fancy. He bought me a dress that cost more than a week's worth of my rent. He made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth something. I wasn't naive about it completely. I knew he had money. I knew his family was wealthy. But I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself I loved him, not for what he could give me. That's what I needed to believe to feel like I wasn't a gold digger. That's what we tell ourselves when we're in love with someone from a completely different world, that love is enough to bridge the gap. Then came the first dinner with his family. His mother scheduled it. There's something about a mother planning a dinner that puts fear in your heart. I spent 3 hours getting ready, changing outfits 5 times. I wanted to look expensive, but not like I was trying too hard. I wanted to look beautiful, but not threatening. I wanted to look like I belonged in their world, even though I knew I didn't. I wore a borrowed dress from a coworker. She'd warned me, "Whatever you do, don't spill anything on it." The house was enormous, not just big, massive. It was the kind of house that has multiple kitchens and rooms you'd never use, the kind of house that says, "We have arrived." I remember standing in their foyer, my borrowed heels clicking against marble floors and thinking, this is where he grew up. This is his normal. His mother was polite. That was the strange part. She wasn't rude. She was worse. She was cold politeness wrapped in questions that weren't really questions. "Where did you grow up?" But really asking, "Where did you come from? What do your parents do?" But really asking, "Are they important? Do you have a college degree?" But really asking, "Are you educated enough for us?" I answered everything with a smile, but inside I was breaking. I could feel her calculating something. I could see her eyes assessing me like I was a piece of furniture she was deciding whether to keep or discard. His father barely spoke. He just watched. And somehow his silence was louder than anything his mother said. But my boyfriend defended me. He held my hand under the table. He complimented my dress and my intelligence and the way I laughed. He made me feel like I was okay, even if his mother didn't think so. That night, I fell more in love with him. I thought he was my hero. I thought he was choosing me over his family's judgment. I didn't know he was acting. 2 months later, he proposed. I know that sounds fast, but when you're poor and lonely and someone rich and beautiful chooses you, time doesn't feel real anymore. It feels like you're in a dream and you're terrified that if you sleep too long, you'll wake up and it'll all be gone. So you say yes before he can change his mind. You say yes before life says no. The wedding was beautiful. His family paid for everything. The flowers, the food, the photographer, my dress. I should have been suspicious about that. I should have wondered why they wanted such a big, expensive wedding when his mother clearly didn't like me. But I was too happy. Or too stupid. Probably both. I remember walking down the aisle and seeing him at the altar. I remember thinking, this is really happening. I'm really getting out. Out of my tiny apartment, out of my cleaning jobs, out of my lonely life. I was getting into his world. I was getting saved. We moved into a house they bought for us. It was smaller than his family's place, but it was still more beautiful than anywhere I'd ever lived. The furniture was already picked out. The artwork on the walls was already chosen. Even the books on the shelves seemed like decorations rather than things people actually read. It was a show house. It was a house for looking perfect, not for living life. His mother started visiting more, 3 times a week. She'd let herself in without knocking. She'd critique how I organized the kitchen, how I did laundry, how I decorated. I'd smile and listen, thinking, this is normal. This is what rich families do. This is what it means to be part of something. But then I started hearing things. Late one night, I woke up and couldn't fall back asleep. My husband was on the phone in the other room. I could hear his voice through the walls. He was talking to his father. He said something that made my stomach drop. He said, yes, everything is going according to plan, just like we talked about. Then he listened for a long time before adding, don't worry. She has no idea. I lay in bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself he was probably talking about work, about some business deal, but deep down, something inside me knew that wasn't true. Something inside me knew I should be scared. I got pregnant 3 months after the wedding. The silence when I told them was deafening. His mother and father exchanged a look, a quick glance that meant something I wasn't part of. Then his mother smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was sharp, like a knife wrapped in velvet. She said, how wonderful, but her eyes said something completely different. During my pregnancy, they were everywhere. They chose the baby's nursery before I could have an opinion. They selected the crib, the bedding, the mobile. His mother bought baby clothes in bulk. But it all felt wrong. It felt like they weren't preparing for a baby. It felt like they were preparing for something else, something I didn't understand. I'd overhear conversations late at night. My husband and his father talking in low voices. Money discussions, timelines, something about when it happens. But whenever I came into the room, they'd stop talking and look at me like I'd caught them doing something wrong. My pregnancy was hard. I was sick for months. I was exhausted in a way that went beyond tiredness. It was like my body knew something my mind didn't. It was like I was carrying more than just a baby. I was carrying anxiety. I was carrying dread. I was carrying a secret I didn't even know I was keeping. The night my labor started, my husband seemed anxious, not excited. Anxious, like he was waiting for something. We got to the hospital at 2 a.m. The labor was brutal. I won't go into details because some pain is too intimate to share with strangers, but I remember my husband checking his watch. I remember him stepping out to make phone calls. I remember him coming back smelling like fresh air and adrenaline, like he'd been outside running around, not sitting by his wife's bedside. When my baby was born, it was the most beautiful and most horrifying moment of my life. beautiful, because I held this tiny human I'd created, and suddenly everything made sense. My whole life had been leading to this moment. Horrifying, because in that moment, I was completely vulnerable. I was bleeding. I was exhausted. I was open in a way I'd never been before. And my husband got a phone call. Right there in the delivery room, his phone rang. He stepped out to take it. I could hear him in the hallway. His father's voice came through the phone so loud I could hear it from my hospital bed. "Is she here? Did it happen?" I held my baby and felt something break inside me. For 3 days, I stayed in the hospital. 3 days of joy mixed with a creeping sense of dread. My in-laws visited. They held the baby, but they didn't coo at her the way new grandparents do. They looked at her like they were inspecting an object, like they were checking something off a list. I was too tired and too hormonal to confront them about it. On the 3rd day, I was sitting in my hospital bed, exhausted and sore and bleeding and trying to breastfeed my baby, when a man in an expensive suit walked in. He wasn't a doctor. I could tell immediately. He had legal papers in his hands. My husband came in behind him. My husband couldn't look me in the eye. The lawyer explained everything in a voice that was professionally sympathetic, but ultimately cruel. My husband was filing for divorce. The marriage was a mistake. They were prepared to take full custody of the baby. They would allow me to leave peacefully if I signed the papers willingly. If I didn't cooperate, they would take me to court and ensure I lost custody anyway, based on my instability and lack of financial means. I remember the sound I made when he said that. It wasn't a scream. It was worse. It was the sound of someone's entire world collapsing. I was still bleeding from childbirth. I was still in pain. I was holding my baby and being told that I couldn't keep her. I looked at my husband. I asked him, "Why?" That's all I could manage. "Why?" He finally met my eyes, and I saw it then. I saw the calculation. I saw the coldness. I saw that there was never any love. It was all a performance. He was an actor, and I was the role he played. His mother appeared in the doorway. She had this small smile on her face, like she'd won something, like she'd scored the final point in a game I didn't even know we were playing. She said, "You should be grateful we gave you this opportunity. Most girls like you never get this far." Most girls like me. As if my background made me less human. As if my poverty made me disposable. I refused to sign the papers. The hospital social workers got involved. There was a commotion. Security got called. His family had more power and more lawyers, but I had desperation, and I had a mother's instinct to protect her child. I left the hospital with my baby still in my arms, still wearing a hospital gown, still bleeding, with nothing but the clothes on my back and absolutely no plan for what came next. I spent one night in a women's shelter. I couldn't do more than that. I needed to disappear. I needed to make sure they couldn't find me. The next morning, I withdrew all the money from the one bank account they'd let me have access to, $500. I bought a ticket on a bus to a city 200 miles away. I gave myself a fake name at a motel and tried not to cry when my baby cried because she didn't understand why her world had fallen apart. For 2 years, I was a ghost. I worked night shifts at hospitals, which was ironic because I was the person being cleaned up after, metaphorically speaking. I'd clean bedpans and change sheets and empty trash while my baby slept in a portable crib in the break room. I was barely surviving. I was eating 1 meal a day so my daughter could eat 2. I was wearing the same 3 outfits, rotating them so it looked like I had more than I did. I was exhausted in a way that becomes your personality. Exhaustion becomes who you are. But my baby was alive. My baby was safe. My baby was loved. And that was enough to keep me moving forward. I'd built a small life in this new city, a tiny apartment, a routine, a community of other single mothers who understood my struggle without me having to explain it. I'd pushed the past so far down that some days I almost forgot it had happened. Almost. Then the letter came. It was addressed to me, though somehow they'd found me. My real name was on it. The return address was from a law firm in another state. My hands shook as I opened it. I thought maybe it was his family, finally tracking me down. I thought maybe he was suing for custody again. I thought maybe everything I'd worked for was about to fall apart. But it wasn't that. It was about an inheritance. My grandmother had died. The grandmother I'd never met. The grandmother I knew nothing about. She'd left me money. Quite a bit of money, according to the letter. Enough that I should contact the lawyer immediately. I went to the meeting in a daze. I dressed in my best outfit, which was really just my least worn outfit. I sat across from the lawyer, and he explained that my grandmother had been a self-made woman. She'd invested in real estate starting in the 1970s. She'd bought properties at the right time, held them, and built a portfolio that was worth more money than I could even comprehend. The lawyer said a number, $1.2 billion. I thought I heard wrong. I asked him to repeat it. He did. $1.2 billion. My grandmother had been a billionaire, and I'd been cleaning hospital floors. The contrast was so extreme that it seemed impossible. It seemed like a prank. It seemed like the universe was playing a cruel joke on me. But it wasn't a joke. The lawyer also handed me a letter, written in my grandmother's handwriting. I recognized it somehow, even though I'd never seen her handwriting before. She wrote about how she'd watched my life from afar. She'd hired people to check on me. She'd known about my husband. She'd known about how they'd abandoned me. She'd known everything. She wrote, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you sooner. But I wanted you to live your life without knowing about me. I wanted you to become who you are on your own, not influenced by money. Now you're free. Now you can do anything you want. Live the life you deserve. Love the life you've built. And please be kind to people who remind you of who you used to be." I cried in that lawyer's office. I cried until my body had nothing left to cry with. I was crying for my grandmother, who I'd never known but who had known me. I was crying for the young girl I used to be, cleaning hospitals and dreaming of a better life. I was crying because everything had changed, but somehow nothing had changed. I was still me. I just had $1 billion now. Within weeks, I hired a team of lawyers, investigators, accountants. I wanted to know exactly what my husband's family had done. I wanted to know if they'd found out about my grandmother and if that's why they married me in the first place. What they discovered was ugly. My ex-husband's family had money, but not as much as they wanted people to think. They were living beyond their means. They had massive debts. And somewhere along the way, they'd looked into my background. They'd found a connection to my grandmother. They thought she was wealthy, and they thought that if my husband married me and had a baby, I'd eventually inherit. They thought they could control the money through me and my child. When they realized I wasn't going to be a willing participant in their scheme, when I ran away instead of begging them for help, they tried to take my baby. They thought if they had custody of my child, they'd eventually control the inheritance anyway. But they'd miscalculated. They'd never fully investigated my grandmother. They'd gotten incomplete information, and by the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. I could have destroyed them legally. I could have sued for fraud, abandonment, emotional abuse. I could have taken everything they had. But instead, I hired lawyers to fight for full custody of my daughter, and I did something different. When we went to court, the truth about their scheme came out. Not through my accusations, but through their own documents, through emails, through financial records, through the paper trail they'd left behind. The judge was appalled. My husband tried to claim he'd fallen in love with me genuinely, but nobody believed him. The timing was too convenient. The plan was too clear. I won custody without even having to fight. I also won child support that was so substantial it was almost insulting to him. But more than that, I won freedom. I won the right to raise my daughter without fear. I won the knowledge that justice, at least in this case, existed. My ex-husband's family didn't recover from the scandal. They faced their own legal troubles. Bad investments caught up with them. The wealth they'd built started crumbling. My ex-husband called me once, years later, asking if I could help him financially. I didn't respond. Some people don't deserve second chances. Some people deserve to experience the exact desperation they inflicted on others. But I didn't stop with just getting even. That wasn't my story to tell. I took my inheritance, and I did something my grandmother never got to see. I built hospitals. I created clinics in poor neighborhoods. I started a foundation that helped women leaving abusive relationships. I hired single mothers before anyone else. I paid them well. I gave them health care and child care and opportunities that I never had. Every time I opened a new facility, I thought about that young girl cleaning hospital floors at midnight, talking to a plant on her windowsill. I made sure the women who worked for me would never feel as desperate as she did. I made sure they knew they mattered. My daughter grew up knowing the truth about her father and his family. I never lied to her. I told her that sometimes people who seem good on the outside are empty on the inside. I told her that money doesn't buy character. I told her that her grandmother, my grandmother, had loved her even though they'd never met. She's a good person, better than I am. She works in nonprofit. She helps refugees. She carries my grandmother's legacy forward in her own way. As for me, I learned something that took me a long time to understand. The universe isn't always fair, but sometimes it balances itself out in ways you never expect. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is exactly what you need to discover who you really are. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is the only way to build something that lasts. My husband's family thought they were clever. They thought they could play life like it was a game with hidden rules they understood, but the universe has its own rules, and karma, though she works slowly, always collects her debts. If you've been abandoned by people you trusted, I want you to know something. What they did says nothing about your worth. It says everything about their character. Don't let them define your story. Don't let their rejection become your identity. You are not the people who hurt you. You are capable of more than they could ever imagine. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me, if you'd been in her position, what would you have done? Subscribe because we have more untold stories that will change how you see life. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this, because sometimes the most powerful moments in life are the ones nobody talks about. Her story is proof that money can't buy happiness, but it can buy freedom. And freedom is priceless. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.